The Dalai Lama is a figure who has captivated global attention not only for his role as the spiritual leader of Tibetan Buddhism, but also for his unwavering commitment to peace, compassion, and nonviolence. His message of kindness transcends religious boundaries and has resonated with millions worldwide. Throughout his life, the Dalai Lama has been a beacon of hope and a voice for the oppressed, particularly for the Tibetan people, whose sovereignty and culture have been threatened by political forces, most notably from China. This chapter serves as an introduction to the Dalai Lama, highlighting his significance in both Tibetan Buddhism and global humanitarian efforts. Born as Tenzin Gyatso in 1935, the 14th Dalai Lama is the latest incarnation of a lineage of spiritual leaders who serve as the supreme heads of Tibetan Buddhism. The title Dalai Lama itself means ocean of wisdom, a title that signifies the immense spiritual and philosophical depth required of the individual who holds it. The Dalai Lama is not merely a religious figure, but also a political leader, traditionally the ruler of Tibet, tasked with maintaining the spiritual and political unity of the Tibetan people. In this capacity, the Dalai Lama has become one of the most influential figures in global discussions on peace, human rights, and the rights of indigenous people. The Dalai Lama's influence extends far beyond the borders of Tibet. His advocacy for peace and compassion has earned him the respect of world leaders, intellectuals, and everyday people alike. The Dalai Lama's advocacy for the preservation of Tibetan culture, the fight for Tibet's autonomy, and his teachings on universal human values have made him a symbol of resilience and spiritual clarity. Despite facing enormous political challenges, including exile and the loss of his homeland, he has maintained a stance of promoting peace through dialogue rather than conflict. Tibetan Buddhism itself, and the role of the Dalai Lama within it, are pivotal in understanding the Dalai Lama's significance. Tibetan Buddhism is a unique form of Mahayana Buddhism, incorporating elements such as Tantra practices and deep philosophical inquiry. The Dalai Lama serves as both a spiritual guide and a living symbol of Buddhist teachings. His duties encompass not only offering teachings on Buddhist doctrines, but also embodying the qualities of compassion, wisdom, and selflessness that are central to the Buddhist path. The Dalai Lama's influence in the world of politics cannot be overstated. His leadership has been defined by his unwavering stance on nonviolence, even in the face of immense hardship and adversity. His decision to pursue a path of peaceful resistance against Chinese occupation in Tibet has garnered worldwide admiration, establishing him as one of the most respected figures in the global peace movement. The Dalai Lama's position as a political leader is unique, as he has held both spiritual and temporal power. However, after fleeing Tibet in 1959 following a failed uprising against Chinese rule, he relinquished his political role within the Tibetan government in exile, focusing solely on his spiritual and humanitarian endeavors. A significant aspect of the Dalai Lama's philosophy is his belief in the interconnectedness of all people, regardless of their race, religion, or background. His message emphasizes the importance of inner peace, compassion, and understanding as fundamental to resolving conflicts. The Dalai Lama argues that lasting peace cannot be achieved through force or coercion, but through understanding and the cultivation of kindness and empathy toward others. His teachings, often framed in terms of compassionate action, encourage individuals to look beyond their own self-interest and consider the well-being of all sentient beings. Over the years, the Dalai Lama has traveled extensively, engaging with various religious, political, and academic communities around the world. His international presence has furthered the cause of Tibetan freedom and highlighted the plight of the Tibetan people, who continue to face severe oppression under Chinese rule. His diplomatic efforts have been marked by a commitment to peaceful negotiation and dialogue, advocating for a solution that respects Tibetan autonomy within the framework of Chinese sovereignty, a position known as the middle way approach. The Dalai Lama's commitment to education and the promotion of human values has extended to his creation of various initiatives and institutions. One such initiative is the establishment of the Tibetan Children's Village, which provides education, health services, and shelter for Tibetan refugee children. He has also worked to raise awareness about environmental sustainability, emphasizing the need for global cooperation to protect the planet and its ecosystems. These efforts, while often overlooked in discussions of his political and spiritual roles, reflect the Dalai Lama's broader commitment to the welfare of all sentient beings. In recent decades, the Dalai Lama has become a Nobel Peace Prize laureate, recognized for his lifelong dedication to nonviolent resistance and the promotion of human rights. His acceptance of the Nobel Peace Prize in 1989 brought further global attention to the Tibetan cause and solidified his position as a global advocate for peace. His recognition by the international community highlights the broader relevance of his teachings, which speak to universal human concerns such as freedom, dignity, and respect for diversity. The story of the Dalai Lama begins in the small village of Takster, located in the Amdo region of Tibet. Tenzin Gyatso, born on July 6, 1935, was the son of a farmer, and his early years were humble and deeply rooted in the Tibetan countryside. He came into the world at a time of relative peace, yet his life would soon be shaped by extraordinary events that would transcend the bounds of his childhood. Tenzin Gyatso's birth was heralded by a series of unusual signs, many of which were interpreted by spiritual leaders as indications of his exceptional future. Growing up in the remote village, Tenzin Gyatso lived a simple and joyful life with his parents, brothers, and sisters. His family was part of the Tibetan farming community, and they enjoyed a life connected to the rhythms of nature. The young Tenzin's childhood was marked by the values of discipline, hard work, and humility that were core to Tibetan culture. Yet even in these early years, he exhibited an innate sense of curiosity and a profound connection to the spiritual world around him. From a young age, he would listen intently to stories of Tibetan Buddhism and the lives of the great spiritual figures who had come before him. When Tenzin was just 2 years old, an extraordinary event would alter the course of his life. The Tibetan government, in accordance with Buddhist traditions, was seeking the reincarnation of the 13th Dalai Lama, who had passed away in 1933. After a long and meticulous search for signs and clues, a group of monks visited the family's home in Takster to investigate whether young Tenzin was the reincarnation they were searching for. They observed his behaviors and preferences, such as his recognition of objects that belonged to the 13th Dalai Lama, and were convinced that Tenzin Gyatso was indeed the reincarnation of the revered spiritual leader. This marked the beginning of a profound transformation for Tenzin. His family was informed of this extraordinary discovery, and the young boy's life was forever changed. At the age of 3, he was taken to Lhasa, the capital of Tibet, to be formally recognized as the 14th Dalai Lama. The journey to Lhasa, though was only a brief one in distance, symbolized the dramatic shift from a life of rural simplicity to one of immense spiritual and political significance. For the young Tenzin, the world as he knew it was about to expand in unimaginable ways. Upon arrival in Lhasa, Tenzin Gyatso's life took on a new and formal structure. He was installed in the Potala Palace, the traditional seat of the Dalai Lama in Lhasa, and began his training in the ways of Tibetan Buddhism. His education was rigorous, focusing on Buddhist philosophy, monastic rituals, and the responsibilities he would eventually carry as both a spiritual and political leader of Tibet. Although the life he now faced was one of privilege and immense responsibility, Tenzin was still very much a child. He would often find himself torn between his youthful desires and the overwhelming duties of his new role. His training was extensive and demanding. By the age of 6, he was already studying the sacred texts of Tibetan Buddhism. His tutors, who were some of the most learned scholars in Tibet, would provide him with instruction in the intricacies of Buddhist philosophy, which was deeply intertwined with Tibetan culture and politics. The young Dalai Lama was not just studying for the sake of acquiring knowledge. He was preparing for the moment when he would take on the mantle of leadership and guide the Tibetan people through turbulent times. This education, while spiritual in nature, was also deeply philosophical, aiming to cultivate the qualities of wisdom, compassion, and humility. Despite the weight of his responsibilities, Tenzin Gyatso was not immune to the joys and challenges of childhood. Like many children, he enjoyed playing with his friends and exploring the vast Potala Palace. He developed a deep connection to the religious rituals and ceremonies that were central to Tibetan life. However, as he grew older, the reality of his position became clearer, and he understood that his life would be dedicated to a cause much larger than himself. The heavy responsibility of leading Tibet, both spiritually and politically, loomed ever larger on the horizon. One of the most significant aspects of Tenzin Gyatso's early years was his unwavering sense of compassion. Even at a young age, he showed signs of the deep empathy that would come to define his later teachings. His tutors would recount stories of how he showed concern for the welfare of others, whether it was a poor beggar in the streets or the monks in his care. His understanding of suffering and his desire to alleviate it were evident from an early age. This innate compassion was a fundamental aspect of his spiritual development, and it would become one of the core principles of his leadership. In addition to his formal education, Tenzin was also deeply influenced by the religious environment in which he lived. The Potala Palace, with its sacred temples and vast libraries, was a place of constant spiritual energy. The presence of high lamas, monks, and spiritual practitioners around him provided an atmosphere of reverence and devotion. As a young boy, Tenzin absorbed the practices and teachings of Tibetan Buddhism like a sponge, internalizing the teachings of compassion, nonviolence, and the pursuit of enlightenment. Tenzin Gyatso's early years were not without their moments of conflict and inner struggle. The transition from a carefree childhood to the demands of spiritual leadership was not an easy one. There were moments when he longed for the simplicity of his early life in Taxter, where the expectations were fewer and the pace of life slower. Yet, as he matured, he began to accept the weight of his responsibilities and the sacredness of his role as the Dalai Lama. This internal struggle, the balancing of personal desires with the needs of the Tibetan people, would continue to shape his character and decisions in the years to come. The recognition of the 14th Dalai Lama is a process steeped in tradition, rituals, and deep spiritual significance, one that goes beyond the mere identification of an individual. In the case of Tenzin Gyatso, the young boy from the village of Taxter, this process was not only about confirming his identity, but also about reaffirming the continuity of Tibetan spiritual and political leadership. This chapter delves into the extraordinary journey of Tenzin Gyatso's recognition as the 14th Dalai Lama, exploring the spiritual and political implications of his identification and the rituals that accompanied his confirmation as the spiritual leader of Tibet. In Tibetan Buddhism, the Dalai Lama is believed to be the reincarnation of a line of spiritual leaders, each one passing on their wisdom, compassion, and responsibility for guiding the Tibetan people. This tradition of recognizing a Dalai Lama is rooted in the belief of samsara, the cycle of rebirth. When a Dalai Lama passes away, his spirit is believed to reincarnate in a young child, and the search for that child is a sacred mission. In the case of the 14th Dalai Lama, his predecessor, the 13th Dalai Lama, had passed away in 1933, and the search for his reincarnation began soon thereafter. The process of finding the reincarnation of the Dalai Lama is highly ritualistic and is guided by a group of senior monks and spiritual leaders. These high-ranking lamas, led by the chief lama of Tibet, are tasked with interpreting the signs, dreams, and visions that indicate the reincarnation's whereabouts. The search involves careful examination of candidates, often through divine guidance, auspicious signs, and the careful study of the child behavior. It is a meticulous process that spans several years, with the recognition being announced only when all signs align. The search for the 14th Dalai Lama brought a group of monks to the Amdo region of northeastern Tibet, where Tenzin Gyatso was living with his family. His family, at the time, had no inkling of the momentous event that was unfolding. The monks, after traveling far from Lhasa, arrived in Taxter, where they began their inquiry. They had already been given clues that the reincarnation of the Dalai Lama would be found in this area, and they methodically set about their task of identifying the child. The process involved many trials and tests designed to confirm the child's identity, including showing him objects that had belonged to the previous Dalai Lama. Tenzin, though only a toddler at the time, demonstrated an uncanny ability to recognize objects that had belonged to the 13th Dalai Lama. He correctly identified the items, such as the Dalai Lama's walking staff and various personal belongings, and even expressed a familiarity with the specific places where these items had been kept. For the monks, these signs were irrefutable proof that Tenzin Gyatso was indeed the reincarnation they had been seeking. The moment of recognition was both surreal and humbling. The confirmation came not only from the young boy's behavior, but also through the auspicious signs, such as visions seen by high lamas and the readings of the sacred oracles. In a deeply ceremonial event, Tenzin Gyatso was officially recognized as the 14th Dalai Lama at the tender age of 3. His family was informed of the remarkable news, and the little boy, who had known nothing other than his rural life in Taxter, was suddenly thrust into a world of immense spiritual and political responsibility. This recognition marked the beginning of his transformation from a child of modest origins into the spiritual leader of Tibet. The significance of this event was not only personal for Tenzin and his family, but had profound implications for the entire Tibetan nation. Following the recognition, Tenzin Gyatso's life was marked by ritual and formality. His family was required to give him up, as he was now the property of the Tibetan people, and he was taken to Lhasa, where he would undergo an intense and rigorous education to prepare him for his future role. At the Potala Palace, the young boy was immediately immersed in the traditions and teachings of Tibetan Buddhism, where he was surrounded by monks, lamas, and scholars who would help shape his understanding of his role and responsibilities. The transition from a simple childhood in Taxter to the life of the Dalai Lama was both awe-inspiring and overwhelming. The young Dalai Lama's recognition was not just a personal transition, but a moment of great political significance. As the spiritual leader of Tibet, the Dalai Lama also held the temporal power of the country. This dual role, both spiritual and political, meant that Tenzin Gyatso would soon be thrust into a complex world of governance, diplomacy, and international relations. The recognition of Tenzin Gyatso also came at a time when Tibet was beginning to feel the growing influence of China, which had designs on asserting control over the region. As the Dalai Lama, Tenzin would be faced with not only the preservation of Tibetan Buddhism, but also the protection of Tibet's sovereignty. In the months and years following his recognition, Tenzin Gyatso began to develop a deeper understanding of the gravity of his position. Though his childhood was marked by the study of spiritual texts and philosophical teachings, he also began to grasp the political dimensions of his role. As the 14th Dalai Lama, he was not only the spiritual guide for the Tibetan people, but also the head of state, responsible for guiding Tibet through a rapidly changing political landscape. The weight of this dual responsibility became clearer with each passing day, as he was introduced to the intricacies of Tibetan governance and the challenges that lay ahead. Tenzin Gyatso's recognition as the 14th Dalai Lama marked the beginning of a journey that would take him to heights of spiritual leadership, political leadership, and international recognition. It was a recognition that would define the course of his life and place him at the heart of one of the most significant struggles of the 20th century, the fight for Tibetan autonomy and the preservation of Tibetan culture. The young boy from Taxter, thrust into a position of immense responsibility, would soon become a global symbol of peace, compassion, and resilience in the face of adversity. The life of Tenzin Gyatso as the 14th Dalai Lama was not merely a matter of ceremonial titles and responsibilities. It was rooted in an intense, rigorous, and transformative spiritual education. From the very moment of his recognition as the Dalai Lama, the young boy was immersed in the sacred teachings and profound wisdom of Tibetan Buddhism. This spiritual education was not just about acquiring knowledge. It was about embodying the essence of compassion, wisdom, and enlightenment. The journey that Tenzin embarked upon would be the foundation for his role as both a spiritual and political leader, preparing him to guide the Tibetan people through one of the most turbulent times in their history. Upon his arrival in Lhasa, Tenzin Gyatso's life immediately took on a distinctly formal structure. He was placed under the tutelage of some of the most esteemed scholars and lamas in Tibet. These teachers were tasked not only with imparting the intricacies of Buddhist philosophy and practice, but also with nurturing his innate qualities of compassion and wisdom. The Dalai Lama's spiritual education was rooted in the study of classic texts, ranging from the Tibetan Buddhist scriptures to commentaries on the nature of reality, meditation techniques, and moral teachings. These teachings were essential for the young Tenzin to fully understand his role and to begin his path of spiritual awakening. At the age of 6, Tenzin began formal studies in the monastic tradition. His education was vast and varied, covering a wide spectrum of Buddhist teachings, including Mahayana philosophy, the nature of the mind, logic, ethics, and metaphysics. He was introduced to some of the most sacred Tibetan texts, including the works of great Buddhist philosophers such as Nagarjuna and Tsongkhapa. The texts were often dense and abstract, requiring a deep intellectual engagement. Tenzin's mind, sharp and inquisitive, embraced these teachings, but it was clear that his path was not just one of intellectual pursuit. His studies were meant to guide him toward a deeper, experiential understanding of Buddhism, not just the accumulation of facts. A central aspect of Tenzin Gyatso's education was the practice of meditation. The Tibetan Buddhist tradition places great emphasis on the cultivation of mindfulness, concentration, and insight. As part of his training, Tenzin would often engage in lengthy meditation sessions, focusing on calming his mind and developing the qualities of loving-kindness, metta, and compassion, karuna. Meditation was seen as the pathway to unlocking wisdom, and the young Dalai Lama was instructed to meditate on key concepts such as the impermanence of life and the nature of suffering, dukkha. This meditative practice was meant to cultivate an inner tranquility that would allow him to respond to the world with greater clarity and empathy. As the years passed, Tenzin's studies deepened and his spiritual education expanded. One of the most significant aspects of his learning was the study of Buddhist logic and debate. Tibetan Buddhism places a strong emphasis on intellectual rigor, and the art of debate is considered an essential component of this discipline. As part of his training, Tenzin would engage in formal debates with his peers and teachers, honing his skills in reasoning, critical thinking, and the ability to understand and articulate complex philosophical concepts. These debates were not only intellectual exercises, but also spiritual practices, designed to strengthen the Dalai Lama's capacity for discernment and wisdom. During this time, Tenzin also began to explore the teachings of Tibetan Tantra, a complex and esoteric branch of Tibetan Buddhism. Tantra focuses on the cultivation of inner power and transformation through rituals, visualizations, and mantras. While the teachings of Tantra are often reserved for advanced practitioners, Tenzin's exposure to these practices was important in deepening his understanding of the profound spiritual potential that resides within every individual. The practices of Tantra were meant to help him overcome the obstacles of the ego and foster a sense of unity with all beings. As his education progressed, Tenzin Gyatso's spiritual development was not confined to the walls of his classrooms. He was frequently exposed to the everyday practices of Tibetan Buddhist monastic life. He participated in various religious ceremonies, observed the rituals of daily life, and interacted with high-ranking lamas who provided additional guidance. These encounters were formative in shaping his understanding of leadership. The Dalai Lama was not only a scholar and a teacher, but also a living example of Buddhist virtues. He began to internalize the role of the Dalai Lama as one who embodies wisdom and compassion in every action, no matter how small. At the same time, Tenzin's education also involved a practical understanding of governance. Though the Dalai Lama was primarily a spiritual leader, he also served as the political head of Tibet. His training included learning about the intricate systems of Tibetan governance, diplomacy, and the responsibilities that came with his position. He was taught about the Tibetan legal system, the role of the Tibetan government in exile, and the international dynamics that affected Tibet. As the youngest Dalai Lama in history, Tenzin's education had to prepare him for not just spiritual leadership, but also the stewardship of an entire nation, making his studies all the more critical. Despite the formal nature of his education, Tenzin Gyatso's childhood was not devoid of moments of personal reflection. He would often spend time in quiet contemplation, away from the crowded halls of learning, where he could connect deeply with his inner self. These moments of solitude allowed him to internalize the teachings he received and build a personal connection with the wisdom of the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. For Tenzin, true education was not just about learning from texts and teachers. It was about cultivating a deep sense of personal integrity and spiritual clarity. Through all of this, Tenzin Gyatso's role as a leader began to take shape. His education, though initially focused on philosophy and meditation, was designed to mold him into a person capable of leading both the Tibetan people and the broader global community. His teachers understood that the Dalai Lama was not simply an academic figure, but a living embodiment of Buddhist values. They took care to instill in him a deep understanding of the responsibility that came with his position, not only as a spiritual leader, but also as a symbol of the unity and continuity of Tibetan culture. The education of the Dalai Lama was designed to make him a beacon of hope and wisdom for his people. As the 14th Dalai Lama, Tenzin Gyatso's role extended far beyond spiritual guidance. He was also the political leader of Tibet. This dual role was deeply rooted in the structure of Tibetan society, where the Dalai Lama not only guided the people in matters of faith, but also assumed the highest authority in governing the land. The task that lay before the young Dalai Lama was immense: to balance the spiritual and temporal needs of Tibet while navigating the complex political landscape that threatened the very fabric of Tibetan autonomy. This chapter explores how Tenzin Gyatso rose to political leadership and how his early experiences and challenges shaped his approach to governance. Upon his recognition as the 14th Dalai Lama, Tenzin Gyatso was thrust into the heart of Tibetan politics. Although his education had prepared him for both the spiritual and political aspects of his role, he was still a child, with the weight of an entire nation's future placed on his shoulders. At just 6 years old, he was formally installed as the head of Tibet, but the governance of the country remained largely in the hands of regents, as the Dalai Lama's political authority was not immediately exercised until he reached a certain age of maturity. His early years of leadership were a delicate balance between spiritual cultivation and political delegation, as the regents and counselors guided the country in his stead. The initial transition into political life was not without its complexities. The regents, who had assumed responsibility for the country in the absence of a fully capable Dalai Lama, played a crucial role in managing the day-to-day affairs of Tibet. They served as intermediaries between the young Dalai Lama and the political affairs of the country, helping to maintain a semblance of stability. Tenzin Gyatso's involvement in political matters was limited during these formative years, as he was still undergoing an intensive spiritual education. But he was keenly aware of the political climate surrounding him. His interactions with the regents and officials, as well as the religious leaders who guided him, helped form the foundation of his political philosophy. Tenzin's first significant exposure to the politics of Tibet came when he was about 15 years old. In 1950, when China's People's Liberation Army marched into Tibet, the situation became urgent. Tibet's sovereignty was directly threatened, and the need for strong political leadership was clear. In response to the mounting Chinese military presence, the Tibetan government, which had been grappling with internal struggles for decades, decided it was time for the young Dalai Lama to take on the full responsibility of ruling. Tenzin Gyatso, now in his mid-teens, was called to assume political leadership at a pivotal moment in history. Although Tenzin was still young, his decision to assume full political power was critical. The Dalai Lama's rise to political leadership was marked by his swift and decisive actions, despite his age. He took on the task with a sense of duty and an unwavering commitment to the preservation of Tibet's cultural and spiritual heritage. In the face of growing pressure from China, Tenzin's political leadership became a focal point for the Tibetan people's hopes and aspirations. He represented the embodiment of Tibetan unity, standing as both a spiritual guide and a symbol of resistance against foreign domination. The political environment in Tibet at the time was complicated. The country was not only facing external threats, but also internal divisions. The Tibetan political system, which had relied on a theocratic structure, was now confronting the challenges of modernization and the tensions between traditional monastic leadership and more secular forms of governance. The Dalai Lama was tasked with reconciling these competing forces while ensuring that Tibet's independence was preserved. His political vision was one of peaceful coexistence, but his leadership would be tested by both internal factions and the looming presence of China's military. As the 14th Dalai Lama, Tenzin Gyatso focused much of his early political efforts on maintaining the independence of Tibet. His government's first response to the Chinese invasion was to appeal to the international community for support. Despite the Dalai Lama's efforts, the political landscape in Tibet became increasingly unstable. In 1951, the Chinese government forced Tibet to sign the 17-Point Agreement, which stipulated that Tibet would become an autonomous region under Chinese sovereignty. This agreement, which was signed under duress, marked the beginning of Tibet's subjugation under Chinese rule. Throughout the signing of the 17-Point Agreement, Tenzin Gyatso remained hopeful that Tibet's autonomy could be preserved within the framework of Chinese rule. He believed that negotiation and diplomacy could secure Tibet's cultural identity and religious freedom. However, as the years passed, it became clear that China's intentions were more imperialistic. Despite his best efforts to maintain Tibet's independence, the political environment grew increasingly hostile, and Tibet's sovereignty was increasingly eroded by Chinese military and political control. During this period, Tenzin Gyatso's political leadership was marked by his commitment to peaceful resistance. He advocated for dialogue and negotiations, but the Chinese government's actions undermined any hope for peaceful coexistence. The Dalai Lama's leadership was rooted in the principle of nonviolence, a core tenet of Tibetan Buddhism. He refused to endorse armed resistance, even in the face of brutal Chinese suppression. His stance was one of moral clarity, as he sought to ensure that Tibet's spiritual and cultural values would survive, even if political independence was no longer attainable. As the Chinese government tightened its grip on Tibet, Tenzin Gyatso faced an increasingly precarious situation. In 1959, after years of escalating tension, an uprising broke out in Lhasa, the capital of Tibet. The Tibetan people, led by monks and civilians, revolted against the Chinese occupation. The uprising, though courageous, was ultimately crushed by the Chinese military, and the Dalai Lama's life was threatened. Faced with the prospect of imprisonment or death, Tenzin Gyatso made the difficult decision to flee Tibet, seeking refuge in India. In 1959, the Dalai Lama was forced to flee Tibet, marking the beginning of a new chapter in his life, one that would be defined by exile, resilience, and the struggle to preserve Tibetan culture and identity. The events that led to his escape from Tibet and his establishment of a government in exile in India were both traumatic and transformative. As the political and spiritual leader of the Tibetan people, Tenzin Gyatso's exile was not just a personal loss, but a collective hardship for the entire nation. This chapter delves into the Dalai Lama's life in exile, the establishment of the Tibetan government in exile, and his relentless advocacy for Tibetan freedom on the global stage. The journey from Tibet to India was arduous and fraught with danger. In the wake of the brutal suppression of the 1959 Tibetan uprising, the Dalai Lama's life was in grave danger. Aware of the Chinese military's plans to capture him, he made the heart-wrenching decision to leave Lhasa, his spiritual and political home. The Dalai Lama, accompanied by a small group of trusted companions, embarked on a perilous trek across the Himalayas to India. The journey took over 2 weeks through harsh mountain terrain and treacherous weather conditions. The Dalai Lama, weakened by exhaustion and uncertainty, found solace in his deep faith and inner resolve. Upon reaching India in March 1959, Tenzin Gyatso was granted asylum by the Indian government, and his arrival marked the beginning of a new phase in his life. Although the physical journey from Tibet to India was complete, the emotional and spiritual journey was far from over. The Dalai Lama's first days in exile were filled with a mixture of relief and sorrow. He had escaped the threat of death, but Tibet remained under Chinese occupation, and his people continued to suffer. In the face of this immense loss, Tenzin Gyatso found strength in his faith and a renewed sense of purpose. His exile, while painful, would become a platform for him to advocate for Tibet's freedom and to foster the preservation of Tibetan culture and religion. With his arrival in India, the Dalai Lama sought to establish a new base of operations for the Tibetan government, which had been in disarray since the Chinese invasion. The Tibetan community in exile was scattered, and the government had to be rebuilt from the ground up. In 1960, the Dalai Lama established the Tibetan government in exile in Dharamsala, a picturesque town nestled in the foothills of the Himalayas in northern India. This was to become the heart of the Tibetan diaspora, where the Dalai Lama would live, work, and continue his advocacy for Tibet's autonomy. The Tibetan government in exile was established to serve as a political entity that would represent the interests of the Tibetan people. While Tibet remained under Chinese control, the Dalai Lama's leadership would persist through this new government. Its primary aim was to ensure the survival of Tibetan culture, religion, and political autonomy in the face of Chinese oppression. The government's creation was a significant and strategic move, marking the Dalai Lama's commitment to ensuring that Tibet's voice would be heard, even from a distance. The Dalai Lama also focused on providing support to Tibetan refugees, helping them establish new lives in India and other countries. One of the Dalai Lama's most profound decisions in exile was to shift his focus from seeking full independence for Tibet to advocating for genuine autonomy within China. He believed that the path to peace and reconciliation would lie in Tibet's ability to preserve its cultural and religious identity while maintaining peaceful relations with the Chinese government. This shift in approach came after years of unsuccessful negotiations with the Chinese government and a growing realization that the pursuit of full independence would be difficult, if not impossible, under the circumstances. The Dalai Lama's call for genuine autonomy emphasized the importance of preserving Tibet's unique cultural heritage, religion, and way of life while seeking to coexist peacefully with China. In the years following his exile, the Dalai Lama traveled extensively around the world, engaging in diplomatic efforts to raise awareness about the plight of the Tibetan people. He visited numerous countries, speaking before international organizations, governments, and individuals. His message was one of peace, nonviolence, and compassion as he sought to educate the world about Tibet's struggles and the Chinese occupation. His advocacy resonated deeply with global audiences, and he became an international symbol of resistance to oppression. The Dalai Lama's tireless efforts garnered widespread support, earning him admiration from people across the globe, including political leaders, human rights activists, and ordinary citizens. In 1989, the Dalai Lama was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in recognition of his unwavering commitment to nonviolence, peace, and the preservation of human rights. The Nobel Committee recognized him for his efforts to promote the peaceful resolution of conflicts, his advocacy for the rights of the Tibetan people, and his ability to maintain a message of hope and compassion even in the face of adversity. The award brought international attention to the Tibetan cause, providing the Dalai Lama with a broader platform to continue his advocacy. However, the Nobel Peace Prize also highlighted the deep irony of his situation. Having been forced into exile, he was now a globally recognized figure, yet his homeland remained under foreign occupation. Despite his success on the international stage, the Dalai Lama's heart remained with the people of Tibet. His work in exile was not only about raising awareness for Tibet's political plight, but also about ensuring the preservation of Tibetan Buddhism. In India, he established numerous schools, monasteries, and cultural centers to provide education to the young Tibetan refugees, many of whom had grown up without a formal education due to the disruption caused by the Chinese invasion. These institutions helped preserve Tibetan language, culture, and religious practices, ensuring that the traditions of Tibet would continue to thrive outside of its homeland. The Dalai Lama's leadership in exile was marked by his belief in the importance of compassion and nonviolence. both as political principles and as personal virtues. His approach to exile was not one of bitterness or resentment, but one of patience, wisdom, and long-term vision. He understood that the struggle for Tibet's freedom was not just a political battle, but a spiritual one as well. The Dalai Lama often spoke of the importance of inner peace and the need to cultivate a compassionate heart in the face of suffering. His teachings, whether in exile or in Tibet, were always rooted in the core Buddhist values of kindness, love, and understanding. After seeking refuge in India, the Dalai Lama not only dedicated himself to the preservation of Tibetan culture, but also embarked on a broader mission to advocate for peace, nonviolence, and human rights around the world. His efforts to spread the message of compassion and interdependence transcended the Tibetan cause, resonating deeply with individuals, governments, and organizations worldwide. His global advocacy and teachings would evolve over the decades, positioning him as one of the most influential spiritual leaders of the 20th and 21st centuries. This chapter explores the Dalai Lama's global outreach, his teachings on compassion and interconnectedness, and his role in the wider fight for peace and human dignity. From the moment the Dalai Lama settled in India, he began traveling internationally, meeting with world leaders, engaging in dialogue, and speaking on behalf of Tibet's struggle for autonomy. His first trips abroad, though primarily focused on raising awareness of the Tibetan cause, gradually expanded into a wider agenda for peace and human rights. The Dalai Lama's message was clear. The key to overcoming the world's greatest challenges lay in compassion, understanding, and mutual respect. His personal example of humility and kindness drew people from all walks of life, and he became a global symbol of nonviolent resistance and moral clarity. One of the most remarkable aspects of the Dalai Lama's global advocacy was his ability to connect with diverse audiences. Whether addressing politicians, spiritual seekers, academics, or ordinary citizens, his message remained consistent, an appeal for peace grounded in the values of compassion, wisdom, and ethical responsibility. His teachings emphasized that the path to solving global problems required a fundamental shift in human consciousness, one that would replace self-centeredness with a deep concern for the well-being of others. This message resonated with people worldwide, offering a spiritual framework for addressing the complex issues facing society. A key component of the Dalai Lama's global outreach was his focus on the importance of interfaith dialogue. He consistently emphasized the need for mutual respect among the world's diverse religious traditions, believing that all religions shared a common goal of fostering compassion, love, and wisdom. He often engaged in interfaith dialogues with religious leaders from Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Judaism, and other faiths. Through these conversations, the Dalai Lama sought to bridge the divides that separated different religious communities and to foster a sense of shared humanity. His approach was one of deep respect for other faiths, and he often spoke about how his own Buddhist beliefs could coexist harmoniously with other spiritual practices. The Dalai Lama's advocacy extended beyond religious dialogue to include environmental concerns. He was one of the first spiritual leaders to publicly recognize the deep interconnectedness between humanity and the natural world. In the early 1990s, he began speaking about the importance of environmental preservation, emphasizing that human beings must take responsibility for the planet's well-being. He viewed the degradation of the environment as not just an ecological issue, but a moral one, as it directly affected the livelihoods and happiness of future generations. His teachings on environmental stewardship were informed by Buddhist concepts of impermanence and the interconnectedness of all living beings. He advocated for sustainable practices and urged individuals and governments alike to recognize the urgency of addressing climate change. In addition to his advocacy for the environment, the Dalai Lama became an outspoken proponent of human rights. He spoke out against various forms of oppression, including the violation of women's rights, the discrimination faced by marginalized communities, and the persecution of religious minorities. His philosophy of compassion extended to all beings, regardless of nationality, race, or religion. He became an ally of various human rights organizations, such as Amnesty International, and used his global platform to bring attention to injustices around the world. His commitment to human dignity was reflected in his refusal to endorse violence, even in the face of oppression. The Dalai Lama's consistent message was that true peace could only be achieved through understanding and reconciliation, never through force or coercion. As his global influence grew, the Dalai Lama also became a prominent advocate for secular ethics. He argued that ethics and morality should not be limited to religious traditions, but should be embraced by people of all backgrounds. His call for secular ethics was grounded in the understanding that human beings share common needs and aspirations, such as the pursuit of happiness and the desire to live in peace. In his view, the cultivation of compassion, kindness, and responsibility should be a universal practice, transcending religious and cultural boundaries. This vision of a universal ethic has gained widespread traction, particularly in the context of modern secular societies that struggle to find a moral foundation independent of religious doctrines. The Dalai Lama's teachings on compassion were perhaps his most profound contribution to global discourse. He emphasized that compassion is not just a fleeting emotion, but a deep and sustained commitment to the well-being of others. According to him, true compassion requires the recognition of the interconnectedness of all beings and the understanding that our happiness is intimately linked to the happiness of others. He taught that compassion should not be reserved only for family and friends, but extended to all sentient beings, including those with whom we may disagree or even those who cause us harm. His teachings on compassion were practical, offering guidance on how individuals could cultivate a compassionate heart through meditation, mindful action, and the practice of loving kindness. Central to the Dalai Lama's advocacy was his ability to maintain a sense of joy and optimism despite the ongoing struggles of the Tibetan people and the many challenges facing the world. His message was one of hope, even in the darkest of times. He often reminded his audiences that happiness is not the result of external circumstances, but the product of inner peace and a compassionate mind. His teachings encouraged individuals to look inward, cultivate a peaceful mind, and extend compassion outward toward others. He modeled this approach in his own life, consistently embodying the qualities of humility, kindness, and wisdom that he preached. Over the years, the Dalai Lama's international reputation continued to grow, and he became a figure of immense spiritual and moral authority. He was invited to speak at prestigious institutions such as the United Nations, the World Economic Forum, and major universities around the world. His interactions with global leaders, including presidents and prime ministers, provided him with a platform to address pressing issues of the time. Despite his position as a global spiritual leader, he remained humble, always redirecting attention away from himself and toward the collective responsibility of humanity to foster peace and harmony. As the 14th Dalai Lama, Tenzin Gyatso not only became a political figure, but also a central spiritual leader for millions of Tibetans and Buddhists around the world. His teachings on Tibetan Buddhism and the deep philosophical insights he shared have cemented his legacy as a spiritual figure of profound significance. The Dalai Lama's approach to spirituality, marked by a blend of rigorous study, personal practice, and compassionate outreach, has left an indelible mark on Buddhist thought and the global spiritual landscape. This chapter explores the spiritual legacy of the Dalai Lama, his contributions to Buddhist philosophy, and the ways in which his teachings have influenced both religious and secular communities worldwide. At the heart of the Dalai Lama's spiritual leadership is his dedication to the teachings of Tibetan Buddhism, particularly the Gelug tradition of Tibetan Buddhism, which emphasizes study, meditation, and ethical conduct. As a child, Tenzin Gyatso's training in the Buddhist monastic tradition was both rigorous and transformative. From an early age, he was exposed to the philosophical and meditative practices that form the foundation of Tibetan Buddhist teachings. These studies encompassed not only sacred texts, but also the development of qualities such as patience, compassion, and mindfulness. It was clear even then that the young Dalai Lama was destined to become a teacher not only for Tibet, but for the world. Throughout his life, the Dalai Lama has placed a strong emphasis on the importance of compassion as the central practice of Tibetan Buddhism. He often speaks about compassion as the root of all spiritual practices, encouraging people to cultivate it as the antidote to suffering. In his view, compassion is not merely an emotion, but an active force that drives individuals to care for others, transcending barriers of race, religion, and nationality. His teachings consistently underscore that true compassion involves recognizing the interconnectedness of all beings and responding to their suffering with a heart full of empathy and love. This fundamental concept, which lies at the heart of his spiritual philosophy, has had a profound impact on his followers and has influenced the broader global conversation on the nature of compassion. In addition to compassion, the Dalai Lama's teachings emphasize the practice of mindfulness and meditation. His approach to meditation, while deeply rooted in traditional Tibetan practices, is accessible to people from all walks of life. He teaches that meditation is not an esoteric practice reserved for monks or advanced practitioners, but a tool for everyone to cultivate mental clarity, emotional balance, and inner peace. His guidance on meditation is practical, offering simple techniques that can be incorporated into daily life. For the Dalai Lama, meditation is a way to connect with one's inner nature, reduce mental distractions, and ultimately attain a state of deep contentment and equanimity. The Dalai Lama's teachings on the impermanence of life are also central to his spiritual message. He regularly reminds his followers that everything in life is transient, and that attachment to material possessions, status, or even relationships can lead to suffering. Understanding impermanence is a way to develop a sense of detachment, which in turn fosters greater freedom and peace of mind. The Dalai Lama encourages people to recognize the fleeting nature of life's circumstances as a way to bring clarity to their priorities. By cultivating an attitude of non-attachment, individuals can navigate the inevitable ups and downs of life with greater resilience and wisdom. Another key component of the Dalai Lama's spiritual legacy is his focus on the interconnectedness of all things. This principle, deeply rooted in Buddhist teachings, is closely related to the concept of interdependence. The Dalai Lama teaches that all beings and phenomena are interconnected and that nothing exists in isolation. This understanding of interdependence extends to all aspects of life, including our relationships with others, our environment, and the universe itself. The Dalai Lama's teachings on interconnectedness encourage individuals to see beyond their own self-interest and recognize the profound impact their actions have on the world around them. It is this perspective that lies at the heart of his advocacy for global peace, environmental stewardship, and social justice. The Dalai Lama's teachings are also marked by an openness to dialogue and learning. He is widely recognized for his humility and his willingness to engage with individuals from all faiths, backgrounds, and disciplines. Whether in discussions with scientists, philosophers, or spiritual leaders of other traditions, the Dalai Lama demonstrates a deep respect for diverse perspectives. He often speaks of the importance of education and the value of integrating scientific knowledge with spiritual wisdom. This openness to dialogue is one of the hallmarks of his leadership, as he consistently encourages his followers to approach life with an open mind and heart, to be willing to learn and grow, and to seek understanding through compassionate engagement with others. One of the most significant contributions of the Dalai Lama to the spiritual world has been his ability to bridge the gap between traditional Tibetan Buddhism and the modern secular world. His teachings, while rooted in ancient Buddhist principles, are accessible and relevant to contemporary life. He has made significant efforts to introduce Tibetan Buddhist practices to a global audience, making them approachable for people of all ages and backgrounds. In the West, where many people were unfamiliar with Buddhist concepts, the Dalai Lama has become a respected figure, helping to introduce mindfulness and compassion-based practices into mainstream culture. He has also been a key figure in the popularization of Tibetan Buddhism, making it one of the most well-known branches of Buddhism worldwide. In addition to his role as a spiritual teacher, the Dalai Lama has also contributed significantly to the academic study of Tibetan Buddhism. His collaboration with scholars and his support for research into Buddhist philosophy and history have helped preserve and disseminate the teachings of Tibetan Buddhism. The Dalai Lama has been instrumental in the establishment of institutions that promote the study of Tibetan Buddhism, including the Central Institute of Higher Tibetan Studies in India. Through his encouragement of academic rigor and scholarship, he has ensured that the rich tradition of Tibetan Buddhism continues to be passed down to future generations, both in Tibet and in the diaspora. Another significant aspect of the Dalai Lama's spiritual legacy is his ability to inspire personal transformation. His teachings are not abstract or theoretical, but are practical and oriented toward personal growth. He encourages his followers to transform their minds, develop their character, and become better human beings. His teachings on kindness, patience, and forgiveness are not just philosophical ideals, but actionable practices that can be cultivated every day. Through his example, the Dalai Lama shows that spiritual growth is a lifelong journey that requires commitment, perseverance, and a deep desire to cultivate wisdom and compassion. The Dalai Lama's spiritual legacy is also characterized by his ability to inspire hope and resilience in the face of adversity. His life, marked by both extraordinary achievements and profound suffering, serves as a testament to the power of inner peace and spiritual strength. Despite the ongoing struggles of the Tibetan people, the Dalai Lama has remained a beacon of hope, teaching others how to navigate life's challenges with dignity and grace. His personal story is a powerful reminder that even in the most difficult circumstances, the human spirit can endure and flourish. The Dalai Lama's journey has always been deeply intertwined with the preservation of Tibetan culture and its unique way of life. When he was forced into exile in 1959, the Tibetan people faced the looming threat of cultural annihilation. The Chinese government's occupation of Tibet brought immense suffering, not only in terms of political oppression, but also in the systematic destruction of Tibetan culture, religion, and language. As the spiritual and political leader of Tibet, the Dalai Lama assumed the responsibility not only of leading the fight for Tibet's freedom, but also of ensuring that the rich cultural heritage of his people would endure for future generations. This chapter explores the Dalai Lama's efforts to protect and promote Tibetan culture in the face of adversity, and how he has become a symbol of resilience for Tibetans around the world. One of the most pressing concerns for the Dalai Lama after fleeing Tibet was the preservation of Tibetan Buddhism. For centuries, Tibet had been a center of Buddhist scholarship and practice, and the monasteries of Tibet were not only spiritual hubs, but also centers of learning, art, and culture. The Dalai Lama's flight to India marked the beginning of his efforts to ensure that these traditions would survive. He worked tirelessly to establish Tibetan Buddhist institutions in exile, including schools and monasteries, which could serve as both spiritual and cultural centers for the Tibetan community. The Dalai Lama's leadership in this effort ensured that Tibet's spiritual and cultural heritage could continue to thrive even outside of Tibet. A key element in the Dalai Lama's efforts to preserve Tibetan culture has been his focus on the Tibetan language. The Dalai Lama has often spoken about the importance of the Tibetan language as a crucial element of the Tibetan identity. He has emphasized that language is the vehicle through which culture, history, and values are passed down from generation to generation. The Dalai Lama's commitment to the Tibetan language has led to the establishment of language schools in India and other parts of the world where Tibetans have settled in exile. These schools teach not only the Tibetan language, but also the traditional Tibetan curriculum, ensuring that young Tibetans remain connected to their cultural roots. For the Dalai Lama, the survival of the Tibetan language is inseparable from the survival of Tibetan culture itself. Beyond the language, the Dalai Lama has also been a champion of Tibetan arts and literature. Tibetan art, music, and literature are deeply tied to the Buddhist traditions that have flourished in Tibet for centuries. The Dalai Lama has consistently encouraged the preservation and promotion of Tibetan artistic expressions, such as Thangka painting, Tibetan opera, and the creation of sacred Buddhist texts. These artistic traditions are more than just aesthetic expressions. They are manifestations of the spiritual and philosophical teachings that have shaped Tibetan life for generations. The Dalai Lama's advocacy for the arts has ensured that Tibetan culture continues to be expressed in vibrant and meaningful ways, even in exile. The Dalai Lama has also placed great emphasis on the role of women in Tibetan culture. He has long advocated for the empowerment of women and the recognition of their contributions to Tibetan society. Tibetan Buddhist traditions, though deeply rooted in monastic practices, have historically provided women with significant spiritual opportunities. The Dalai Lama has been a vocal advocate for the increased participation of women in Buddhist leadership roles, encouraging the ordination of female monks and the recognition of female spiritual teachers. His efforts have contributed to the growing visibility and respect for female practitioners in Tibetan Buddhism, a development that has resonated with Tibetans both in exile and in Tibet. As a cultural ambassador, the Dalai Lama has made it his mission to raise awareness about the plight of Tibet and its people. Throughout his travels, he has spoken at international forums, universities, and interfaith gatherings, sharing the stories of the Tibetan people and their rich cultural heritage. His role as a cultural ambassador has helped bring international attention to the Tibetan cause, attracting support from individuals, governments, and organizations worldwide. The Dalai Lama's ability to communicate the importance of Tibetan culture in the global arena has been instrumental in garnering global solidarity for Tibet's struggle for freedom and self-determination. In the wake of China's control over Tibet, the Dalai Lama's advocacy for Tibetan culture has extended to the international stage, where he has worked with global institutions to preserve Tibetan heritage. He has been a key figure in the establishment of the International Campaign for Tibet, an organization that seeks to raise awareness about the challenges facing Tibet and its people. The Dalai Lama has also worked with international organizations, such as UNESCO, to advocate for the protection of Tibetan cultural heritage sites, many of which have been threatened by the Chinese government's policies in Tibet. His efforts have not only helped preserve the physical remnants of Tibetan culture, but also safeguarded the intangible aspects of Tibetan identity, such as religious practices and oral traditions. While the Dalai Lama's primary focus has been on the preservation of Tibetan culture in exile, he has never wavered in his commitment to the people of Tibet who remain under Chinese rule. His exile in India has provided him with a platform to reach a global audience, but his heart remains with the people of Tibet, whose cultural and spiritual lives continue to be suppressed. Despite the challenges, the Dalai Lama has remained steadfast in his belief that Tibetan culture will endure. He often speaks about the resilience of the Tibetan people and their capacity to maintain their cultural identity, even under difficult circumstances. His optimism and unwavering commitment to the Tibetan cause have been a source of strength for his followers and have inspired many to continue fighting for the protection and recognition of Tibetan culture. The Dalai Lama's efforts to preserve Tibetan culture are not limited to the material and spiritual aspects of Tibetan life. He has also worked to instill in his followers a sense of pride and self-respect in their cultural heritage. His teachings emphasize the importance of Tibetan cultural values, such as the emphasis on hospitality, respect for elders, and the importance of community. The Dalai Lama often speaks about the need for Tibetans to remain rooted in their cultural traditions while also adapting to the realities of modern life. He encourages younger generations to embrace their Tibetan identity with pride, while also remaining open to the world around them. This balance between tradition and modernity is a central theme in the Dalai Lama's teachings on cultural preservation. The Dalai Lama's dedication to the preservation of Tibetan culture extends to the next generation. He has been deeply involved in educating young Tibetans, both in exile and in Tibet, about their heritage. His teachings emphasize the importance of Tibetan youth as the future bearers of their culture, and he has stressed the need for them to be active participants in the preservation and revitalization of Tibetan traditions. The Dalai Lama has often said that the future of Tibet lies in the hands of its young people, and he has encouraged them to take pride in their cultural legacy while also developing the skills needed to thrive in a rapidly changing world. As the 14th Dalai Lama enters his twilight years, his vision for the future of Tibet, the Buddhist world, and the planet at large remains a powerful and unwavering force. Throughout his life, He has been not only a spiritual and political leader, but also a moral compass for the global community. The Dalai Lama's vision extends beyond the borders of Tibet, transcending religious and cultural divides, and seeks to bring about a world that is more compassionate, peaceful, and sustainable. His calls for universal human values, compassionate leadership, and environmental stewardship offer a guiding light in an increasingly complex and divided world. This final chapter explores the Dalai Lama's enduring vision for the future, his hopes for Tibet, and his legacy for future generations. At the core of the Dalai Lama's vision for the future is his belief in the fundamental unity of humanity. Throughout his public life, he has emphasized the importance of recognizing our shared human experience, transcending divisions of race, nationality, and religion. For the Dalai Lama, the concept of one human family is central to his ethical teachings. He often speaks of the need for individuals to develop a sense of global responsibility, to care not only for their own communities, but for the well-being of the entire human family. His belief in human interdependence is rooted in Buddhist teachings, yet it resonates with people of all faiths and backgrounds. He has urged world leaders to focus on the common good, to prioritize compassion and empathy, and to recognize that our collective future is tied to the choices we make today. The Dalai Lama's vision for global peace is closely tied to his belief that true peace cannot be achieved through force or domination, but through inner peace and ethical living. In his view, lasting peace begins with the individual's ability to cultivate peace within themselves. His teachings advocate for the development of mindfulness, compassion, and understanding as the foundation for harmonious relationships, both on a personal and global scale. He often calls on individuals to embrace nonviolence, ahimsa, and to approach conflict with an open mind and a compassionate heart. In a world fraught with political tensions and violence, the Dalai Lama's call for inner peace as the starting point for global peace has resonated deeply with people worldwide. One of the Dalai Lama's most profound contributions to contemporary thought is his advocacy for the importance of secular ethics. While his teachings are deeply rooted in Tibetan Buddhism, he has consistently emphasized that the values he espouses, such as compassion, nonviolence, and respect for human dignity, are universal and can be embraced by people of all faiths or even those who do not follow a particular religious tradition. His concept of secular ethics seeks to build a moral framework based on shared human values rather than religious doctrine. In his view, a secular approach to ethics can help bridge the divides between different belief systems, fostering mutual respect and cooperation in an increasingly globalized world. This idea has been particularly impactful in discussions about the role of religion in public life and the need for moral leadership in the modern era. Another key aspect of the Dalai Lama's vision is his deep concern for the environment and the future of the planet. He has long been an advocate for environmental sustainability, believing that the health of the earth is intrinsically linked to the health of humanity. The Dalai Lama's teachings on compassion extend not only to human beings, but to all living creatures, and he has often spoken about the need to protect the natural world from the destructive effects of human greed and negligence. His message calls for a radical shift in how humans interact with the environment, one that is grounded in respect, mindfulness, and stewardship. He advocates for a more sustainable lifestyle that prioritizes harmony with nature and the well-being of future generations. The Dalai Lama's vision for Tibet remains unwavering, despite the ongoing challenges his people face under Chinese occupation. While he continues to advocate for the preservation of Tibet's spiritual and cultural heritage, he has also shifted his focus toward finding peaceful solutions to the political struggle. His middle way approach, which seeks genuine autonomy for Tibet within China, reflects his commitment to peace and nonviolence. He has long advocated for the return of basic freedoms to the Tibetan people, including the right to practice their religion and preserve their culture. At the same time, the Dalai Lama has consistently emphasized the importance of dialogue and mutual understanding between Tibetans and the Chinese government. His belief in the possibility of peaceful resolution, even in the face of adversity, underscores his deep commitment to the principles of compassion and nonviolence. One of the most enduring aspects of the Dalai Lama's legacy is his ability to inspire future generations to carry on his work. The Dalai Lama has always placed great importance on education, both spiritual and secular, as the key to addressing the world's most pressing challenges. His encouragement of young Tibetans, both in exile and in Tibet, to embrace their cultural heritage while also adapting to the modern world is central to his vision for the future of Tibet. He has repeatedly expressed his confidence in the younger generation, believing that they will play a crucial role in shaping the future of Tibet and the world at large. His message to young people is one of hope, resilience, and responsibility, urging them to take an active role in creating a world that is more compassionate and just. In his later years, the Dalai Lama has also begun to reflect on the future of his own role as the spiritual leader of Tibet. He has spoken openly about the possibility of the institution of the Dalai Lama coming to an end. His belief that Tibetan Buddhism can continue to thrive without a Dalai Lama figure is rooted in his deep understanding of the impermanence of all things. He has indicated that if future generations of Tibetans feel that the role of the Dalai Lama is no longer necessary, he would be content with that. This acceptance of impermanence is a reflection of his Buddhist teachings and his unwavering commitment to the well-being of his people over his own legacy. The Dalai Lama's openness to this possibility demonstrates his humility and his focus on the greater good rather than personal attachment to the institution. Despite this openness to change, the Dalai Lama has made it clear that his work in promoting the values of compassion, ethics, and peace will continue until the end of his life. He remains dedicated to his mission of spreading the message of Tibetan Buddhism, advocating for the rights of the Tibetan people, and promoting global peace. His travels, lectures, and writings continue to inspire millions around the world as he shares his wisdom with individuals from all walks of life. The Dalai Lama's voice remains one of the most powerful forces in advocating for a kinder, more compassionate world. In conclusion, the Dalai Lama's vision for the future is one that transcends boundaries, whether they be cultural, religious, or national. His focus on universal human values, secular ethics, environmental sustainability, and the peaceful resolution of conflicts offers a hopeful pathway for humanity in a world often marked by division and conflict. His unwavering commitment to the Tibetan people, his belief in the transformative power of education, and his dedication to creating a world founded on compassion and peace have ensured his place as one of the most influential spiritual leaders of our time. As he continues to share his message with the world, the Dalai Lama's vision remains a beacon of hope and guidance for future generations.